Greetings, Otaku Faithful. Thank you for joining again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Arrow episode review right here on Otaku Assemble! Weekly, as always, I'm here to bring you the latest in this week's Arrow episode review, and this is my review of Season 1, Episode 5, entitled Damage. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode as a whole. It was a pretty good episode, I'll admit. However, most of the events in this week's episode did happen as I expected them to. You know, everything from Oliver's arrest to his holding, his release, the trial, his scapegoat. Pretty much, I called that shit in last week's review. And even the thing with Walter and Mora and, you know, the discovery of the Queen's Gambit and that whole thing, kind of expected that to happen, but there were a few surprises in this week's episode. One in particular that I'll discuss in more detail later on in this review. So, first thing I want to talk about in this review is, okay, to comment back on, you know, Oliver's whole plan. Like I said, I pretty much called that in last week's review, that he was going to use Diggle as his scapegoat, you know, because either, granted, I didn't think he was going to throw that party, but I was thinking more of he was going to, you know, be in holding or something, and then Diggle was going to be Green Arrow, you know, elsewhere. And so, like I said, I expected that to happen, but it didn't exactly happen in the manner I thought it was going to happen, but it still happened either way. So, there you go. But there is one thing that probably the biggest thing that struck me in this week's episode, I'm talking about a negative, is the scene when Oliver and Laurel kiss. That entire scene, completely melodramatic, completely out of place. Completely out of place. And I talked about this in last week's review. So I don't want to, you know, beat a dead horse, but the way they're setting up Oliver and Laurel's relationship, I don't like it. It seems like in the last couple of episodes, we've been getting too many forced scenes, forced romantic scenes instead of natural romantic scenes. And this is what I mean when I say a natural scene. A natural scene is a scene that's believable. A scene where you could sit there and say, yeah, that could totally happen. It's a scene that is, for the most part, overlooked. Why? Because it is so natural. It comes off to most people as just general conversation, when really you're sitting up there and you're delivering character development, you're building, you're supporting the relationship. I'll give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Episode 2, the scene when they're in Laurel's apartment eating ice cream, that was a natural romantic scene. Why? Because to most people, you might just think, well, fuck it. You know, that was just a scene giving us some type of exposition into Oliver and Laurel's background, you know, and they're just, you know, kind of chumming it, you know, eating ice cream and whatnot right before the action sequence, right? But that's the thing. It was completely natural. It was realistic. You could see how that could happen. Because remember, that was before, I believe, yeah, that was the episode. Remember what happened in episode 2 at the very ending when Oliver blew her off? I believe that was episode 2. Maybe it was episode 1. I'm more inclined to think that was episode 2 because that's kind of when he blew everybody off. But the thing is this, that made sense. That was in place. The scene in this week's episode, no, it's not. Because look at what's going on. Oliver was arrested. He requested Laurel to defend him, right? Now, granted, of course, he had his own biased reasons for doing so. What with their history, what with her knowing him and all that type of jazz. But on the surface, for those people who aren't aware of their history, it's a professional relationship. You see what I'm saying? And what would have made more sense is if that whole scene or that conversation started off as strictly a professional a professional conversation, which they kind of tried to do, but not really. And then it got into a much more intimate relationship. And this is what I mean. Their conversation at the end of the episode, where she was talking about how she didn't know about the torture and all that type of jazz, that is a natural fucking romantic scene. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you follow what I'm saying? How at the end of the episode, you know, she pretty much told him they could never be together, but she, you know, she listed her reasons why, having, you know, with the information she garnered in this week's episode and all that type of jazz. That makes a lot more sense than the bullshit tonsil hockey in the middle of the fucking party during the climax of the episode, completely out of fucking place. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Okay. The flashback. Let me talk about the flashback. Once again, I like the flashback. Why? Because it related back to, you know, it related to the events in this week's episode. I like that they, you know, that they pick back up with that and they're seeing it through. But a couple of interesting things that I'm curious about with the flashback. Now granted, I should know this because I've actually read Green Arrow. I mean, I've read Green Arrow comics. Still don't know the name of his mentor. For the sake of the discussion, we'll just call him Mentor. But anywho, I liked the whole, you know, the whole torture angle, because what it did was, remember what they were talking about with when they were taking, no, it was when they were in the plea meeting. Remember when Homegirl was talking about the plea? And she said, well, you could very well be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I like the whole torture angle because it introduces that idea. And now that that idea has been introduced, now if they wanted to, they could actually play off of it. I mean, I mentioned this before in my very first, in the pilot review, where I said, clearly Oliver's suffering from that, because remember with the dreams and whatnot that he was having. So we know that, but I like the fact that somebody said it out loud. And now that, and a professional said it out loud nonetheless. So now that it's been said out loud, and now that, you know, Oliver's heard it, Laurel's heard it, Detective Lance has heard it, do you follow me? Now the writers could potentially come up with an episode or maybe even a storyline later on in the future that could use that as its foundation. You know, bring about this idea that maybe Oliver is mentally disturbed, maybe he's not in his right mind. And hell, once they do that, that just opens up the door for so many other possibilities. I mean, you're talking about maybe Oliver's obsessive, you know, Oliver has illegitimate guilt, or maybe unreasonable guilt, irrational guilt, you know, blaming himself for so many things. You know, all those possibilities come about once you start going into that psychological territory. So I thought that was cool. Now, the only other thing about the flashback I have to say is this. Is this going to be the last time we see these characters? Because you got to remember, the group in which Deathstroke, that was the name of the guy with the mask for all my non-comic book readers, that was Deathstroke. Anybody who's seen Teen Titans, you might know him by the name Slade. Anywho, remember, Deathstroke's company, his organization, they were looking for Mentor. They were looking for him. And remember what he told Oliver. You know, he trapped Oliver in the cave and he says, you know, they're looking for me. You didn't sell me out. I'm going to, you know, throw them off. I'm going to lead them off course. Well, now that they know that he's on the island, and now that they've had some type of track of him, maybe they would have just gone after him, you know, full force. And this could potentially be the last time we see of any of those characters. Then again, it could also mean that maybe he'll get away, in which case Deathstroke and company will have to come back for Oliver. Remember, we saw the mask with the arrow through it, at the beginning of the pilot. So, but we don't know who that was. Maybe that was Oliver. You know, we don't know who that was, who could have taken out Deathstroke. And then that's just his mask. We don't even know if Deathstroke really is dead. So all those questions arise by the way they closed out the flashback in this week's episode. All that's still open for speculation. And so my final thoughts on this week's episode is going to be the scenes with Walter and Maura, and pretty much my big surprise in this week's episode being the fact that apparently Maura is not a villain. Did you guys catch that? I'll say it again. Maura is not a villain. It is highly suggested based off of the scenes in this week's episode that she is not in charge, or she doesn't have much control in whatever body or whatever organization or whatever people are responsible for the sabotage of the Queen's Gambit. You see what I'm saying? And what we know that there is something connecting the Queens and all the people that Oliver's been going after. We don't know if it's an organization. We don't know if it's one person. We don't know what it is. It could be a scandal, a cover-up. We don't know what it is, but we do know there is something connecting all these people, and I bet you dollars to fucking donuts somebody is in charge of it all. Well, we found out, or at least it's suggested in this week's episode, that Maura does not have she does not have command in that. She is, for the most part, another spoke on the wheel. And it is suggested that she is only cooperating because she cannot afford to have whoever those people are. She can't afford them to have, she can't afford to have them as enemies. You see what I'm saying? So now this is very interesting because I'm thinking, she's, criminal mastermind, rich widow, kind of pulling the strings. No. It's now suggested that she's a victim of circumstance. And because, hell, she even threatened, remember what she said? She told Homeboy, you come after my family, I'm gonna burn your world to ashes. Which I liked, man. That was fucking awesome. So, I'm saying, that was real. I like that. That was kick fucking ass. Because it would have been so easy to just go for that cliche. But now, hang on a minute now. Maybe she's not the one in charge of this shit. You see what I'm saying? So now that brings about some interesting possibilities. And then also, go off. Stop. Damn phone. Also, I was surprised that Walter left her. Didn't expect that to happen because my thing was, to be honest, I thought Walter was going to get snuffed. I thought he was going to get whacked. Once you started digging into that, we found out, of course, it was the security dude, but I figured Walter was going to get whacked. But maybe Walter got the hell out of Dodge because he knew if he pursued it, he was going to get whacked. But it didn't really matter. He got the information he needed. He knew that that she knew about it, and he knew that she was keeping secrets from him. That's all the information he really needed. And to be honest, man, Walter's pretty fucking smart wanting to get away from that situation because if there's no actions on Walter's part, there's no need for retaliation on Maura's associates' part. So it actually makes a lot of sense. Now, my question is he going for good, or is he just going to be gone temporarily? Or, check this out. Hang on a minute. Now, this is a speculation I'm going to close this review out with. Check this out. What if, and this is just a what if, but what if, when Oliver finds out about his mom's involvement with these associates, right? And maybe Walter abroad is going to find out more of this himself. What if Walter becomes a potential ally for Oliver later on in the future? More so of, well, I mean, Oliver has money, we know that, but I'm thinking maybe Walter could be more so of kind of like his Lucius Fox, if you will, the silent, out of public. Well, but granted, I mean, Walter is running the company, but funding Oliver's operations off the books, That type of thing. The idea that they're banding together because they have a common enemy. Then again, Walter could be like, yo, I don't have a hand in this fucking fight. I'm bouncing. That's very possible too. But I'll tell you this though. I very highly suspect that I don't think this whole thing is going to turn out as kind of like the royal family drama that I thought it would. Especially after, in regards to what I said about Mora earlier in the review, I could very easily see the queens unifying against these associates rather than the secrets tearing them apart. You follow me? I mean, each one is equally possible, but what I'm saying is I'm more inclined to believe there's going to be some type of union, some type of banding together against these associates rather than, everybody trying to, everybody against everybody else. Especially when you consider they have a common enemy. Because I don't think Mora, like I said, Mora's not in business with these guys by choice. It seems like it's forced. It seems like it's because, she needs to survive, because she can't afford any enemies, because they could destroy her, because it puts her in danger, so she has to play ball. But if she finds out about Oliver's secret, man, fuck that shit. It's like, all right, time for playing ball is over. We taking it to you, motherfuckers. So I could very easily see the queens banding together in that campaign. And so with that being said, that's going to wrap up this week's Arrow review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. And in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this week's episode, as well as your speculations for next week's episode or for later on in the season. All are welcomed in the comments below. Keep an eye out for discussion of the week, either on Friday or Saturday. And I think, if possible, I'm going to try to get another podcast going, and that'll be up on Sunday. So, with that being said, this is Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.